This is Damian Macy, representing the Friends of the Marshall Public Library and our Oral History Project. It is Thursday, June the 18th of 2015, and I'm at the library with Mr. Robert Tapscott, and I can call him Bob, I believe. And he and his wife Mary live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But I'm interviewing him today because he does have Marshall roots, family roots, and he and I were in the second, third, and fourth grade at the old North Side School together. So we've kind of kept in touch over the years, and it's a delight to have him here. And with that, I will introduce you to Robert. Bob, you're on.
Thank you very much, David. I actually spent only 7 years in Marshall, living in Marshall, that is. And yet I feel like it's probably some of the most important 7 years I've ever spent. It's during my formative years. It's actually from the second grade through the 7th grade. And then because of health reasons, we left town. But my folks are from here. My dad was a Tapscott. There was a bunch of Tapscotts that came here in 1840 into Darwin. And they lived in Darwin for about 10 years, and then they moved into Anderson Township up towards Auburn, very, very, very close to Auburn, actually, and farmed up there. They had a whole bunch of kids, almost none of whom, or whose descendants even live in the county anymore. The boys, for the most part, eventually gave up farming. The girls, in some cases, married farmers, but the boys gave up farming and went into different things. My dad, who was actually at that point a third generation of the Tapscotts here in the state, became a steel worker, iron worker. So, but nonetheless, so the roots are deep on that side. They're also fairly deep on my mother's side. My mother was German. My granddad was Adam Imel. He farmed south of town, about 9 miles down by, really relatively close to Grand Turn Church. There was a whole bunch of Germans down there. There was the Imels and the Geisers, the Millers, actually originally Muellers. Anyway, the Millers and the Schaefers and the Zieglers were all living in that area. My granddad on my mother's side came over relatively recently. The Imels were not in this county nearly as long as the Tapscotts. The Imels came over in 1895 or thereabouts, within a year or two of that. My granddad was actually born in Germany. So they came over from Germany then. One of the first things they did was built, or maybe just rebuilt, I don't remember what the earliest date was, but they certainly rebuilt the Grand Turn Church. My granddad, Adam, and my Uncle Herman, and my other Uncle Chris, an in-law by the name of Ziegler, were all on the board of helped get the church constructed, reconstructed I should say, and built a new brick church which is down there now. In the early days, and this is before my time, the services were always in German. And I remember going to my granddad's house and seeing stacks of German books, song books, which they had removed from the church when they decided they'd better go to English, because for two reasons. Number one is during the First World War there was some antagonism towards Germans, but even more important, much more important really, was none of the kids could speak German. And so they had all these children down there that didn't have the least idea what was going on. And so, I don't know, around 1920 or so, thereabouts, maybe a little bit before that, 18, they went from German to English. And now, of course, it's strictly English. It was started out as a evangelical church. Then it joined forces with the Brethren Church, became the Evangelical United Brethren. And then they joined forces with the Methodist Church, and now it's the United Methodist Church. But really, it turns out that the Brethren Church and the Evangelical Church were originally break-offs of the Methodist Church anyway. They broke it off in the United States because the Germans could not understand English. They led their own church in German, so the only reason they broke off was not because of theology, it's because of language. Anyway, my family was very heavily involved with Grand Turn Church on the German side, my mother's side. I don't know what my dad's side was. I think they were primarily Baptist, but I could be wrong about that. They went to a number of churches. I know Freedom Church is one up around Anderson Township. I think they also went to Auburn Church. In fact, my great-grandfather on my dad's mother's side, it's the Wright side, was a minister up there. His name was Richard Wright, and was the minister at Auburn Church. Anyway, that was all before my time. My folks met, I think they met at Grand Turn Church, actually, in spite of the fact that my dad was from Anderson Township. They met at Grand Turn Church. I understand they were introduced by one of my mother's cousins. And I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, because Marshall didn't have a hospital. So I was born in Terre Haute, Indiana. But I certainly don't consider myself from Indiana. That was in 1938. And then almost immediately we left town because my dad was looking for work. He was an iron worker. And it didn't take very long before work came his way, and more than he could even handle because of the war. He began working for DuPont to help construct chemical plants throughout the country. So we went from state to state. We actually lived, and this is true, we actually lived in 17 states during my first 7 years of life.
Wow.
Just moving from state to state. He'd work from one place for a while, then move on to the next one, and so on. DuPont would move him around. They actually made fairly decent money for the time, quite good money, because of the fact that they needed iron workers so badly. And my dad tried to join the army in the Second World War, and they wouldn't let him in because he had a hearing problem and apparently a flat foot problem, neither of which I ever noticed. I never noticed the fact that he limped a little bit. I never noticed the fact that he had a hearing problem at all. And they were both very slight, but it kept him out. And so we did that, and then finally, this must have been about 1945, at the end of the war, or at least towards the end of the war. I think it was at the end of the war. The family moved back here to Marshall, and my dad began driving to Danville, Illinois. That's a long drive, every day to work up there and to come back here to live. And so that was when I came back here. I started the 7th grade. That's when I met Damien.
Second grade?
Second grade, I'm sorry, second grade. Thank you, Damien. Second grade, I started and went through the 7th grade. Damien was with me a good part of that time. And I have to say, he was probably my best friend, Damien Macy. I met a lot of other kids, and I went to Northside School. There was Damien, Ron Sprague, Charles Burrell, a bunch of girls I knew, Cammie Kay and Peggy Hollenbeck and Carol Curran, Theta Ray Thompson. I always feel like she was my girlfriend. She had braids and
blonde hair.
Blonde hair, yes. Theta Ray's father owned a flower, actually a nursery right near us, a greenhouse, and sold flowers and plants and things like that. We lived on Spruce Street, 906 Spruce Street, I believe a few blocks south of Damien. I think that's right. I used to go to his house all the time and play with Lincoln logs. I'd go over there and we'd play Lincoln logs, and his mother would always serve us the same thing. You probably don't remember this, David. They always serve us crackers and I believe milk, or milk and crackers and Pepsi, Coca-Cola. I just remember the crackers. The crackers is what I really remember. And we used to go a lot. The kids in that era, first of all, parents didn't do as much with their kids then. Marshall was a town where the kids were really quite safe, and they just turned loose. And the kids would play with the kids, the adults would play with the adults, and they were really kept separate. When I wanted to play baseball, I didn't play baseball with my dad. I played baseball with my friends. And it was kind of nice. It was really nice. We used to run around our bicycles, and we could go all over town if we wanted to. I used to come down and drink various types of fountain concoctions at the drugstore. There was 2 drugstores downtown. Well, I think there was only 2, and I can't remember which was which, but always it's the corner drugstore that I really like to go to. The one nearest us, one nearest to the library.
It was Benson's.
Was it Benson's? Thank you. And then down the street from that a little bit, there was another one. I never went there.
That was Kiefer's.
Okay. I went to Benson's, and I used to go down there and drink something if I could scrounge some money up. And it was there that I learned how to read, literally read. I, for somehow or other, got a book, and I don't remember if I bought it there at the drugstore or not, but or it was given to me, but it's Robert Heinlein's Spaceship Galileo, I think was the name of it. It was a science fiction book, obviously, by Robert Heinlein. And I sat on the curb in front of that drugstore, and this is true. I sit there, first time I ever read anything for pleasure, and I sit there and read that book from cover to cover, sitting on the curb in front of Benson's drugstore in the middle of the summer. It must have been hot. And read the whole thing through, and that turned me on to reading. Ever since then, I've read everything I get my hands on.
What was the name of the book?
I think it's Rocket Ship Galileo, I believe. I'm almost certain that's the name of the book. And I started reading other books. I read The Boy Who Batted 1.000. I guess you could say The Boy Who Batted 1,000. In other words, he never missed anything. And that's because he learned how to foul pitches off. So if it was, he'd either foul them off or he'd hit them, one or the other. But he usually ended up walking. But and so I remember reading that. And of course, there's all these mystery stories, things like, I don't remember, Mary and the Old Barn Mystery and all these sort of things. And I can remember reading those mysteries right and left. I used to go out to my cousin, my Uncle Herman Eimel, that would have been my mother's brother, had a farm just north of town, out just a little past Marshall Cemetery. And his daughter, Anne Marie, had tons of small, thick, I guess they're really children's books. I used to read all those things. Used to play board games with her. Uncle Wrigley is the one I remember playing. You don't ever see it anymore. Anyway, I could never do that. We just did a lot of playing around when I was a kid. I know the one thing we used to do is go up and taunt each other into exploring something we used to call the old haunted house. There's a huge brick, I'm going to say mansion. I don't know if they call it a mansion today, but I think it was. I think it's about 3 stories high. Say right in the center of the block, and it must have been on Spruce Street, and I don't know what the north-south street would have been.
Between 7th and 8th.
Between 7th and 8th. It's right just catty-corner from the dollhouse. Mm-hmm. And you, David, did you go down there?
Not too much. I guess that was supposed to be kind of off limits for me. And that house was Schofield.
Oh, yes, I remember the name now. Mm-hmm. But we always call it the old haunted house.
Yes, it looked like just something you'd see in a haunted movie.
That's right. There was, on the front door, there was a stain in the glass. There's a white stain. It looked exactly like a ghost peering out. And us kids used to tease each other and see if anybody would go up the porch, and almost none of us ever did. Certainly we wouldn't knock on the door or try the door, but it was a great place to hide around. We either do that or we play Cowboys and Indians. We used to have cat pistols, of course, back in those days. I don't know if they still make cat pistols. But we used to have cat pistols and play Cowboys and Indians up and down the street. My brother Jim broke his arm in front of our street, or on our street, I should say, in front of our house, riding his bicycle. He slid in the gravel. But that's about the only thing that's ever seriously ever happened to us. So I guess if that's the most serious thing, we didn't live too bad a life. Anyway, like I said, by the time I got to be in the 7th grade, I developed asthma. Actually, I'd had asthma for some time, and the doctors advised my folks to move, and so we moved off to Denver, And I've outgrown my asthma. I haven't had asthma since, but it's kind of a shame because we all left what we all consider to be our hometown, which is Marshall and Clark County. Anyway, that's, the rest of my life is not that interesting. It has absolutely nothing to do with Clark County. It has nothing to do with Marshall. I went off to Denver and went to school and became a professor of chemistry for quite a few years. I retired in 1999, and ever since then I've been doing two things. One is I work for a homeless shelter, half-time, not for pay, but I'm on the board of directors and I'm the treasurer. And I do all their computer work because they got to keep track of who they have there and how long they've stayed and all those sort of things.
Is that in Albuquerque?
In Albuquerque. This is all in Albuquerque, yeah. And actually, my professorship was in Albuquerque also. I got a job offer after I went to the University of Illinois. It had nothing to do with me ever living in Illinois, just that when I was in Denver, I went to University of Colorado, got my BS degree, and then decided to go to the University of Illinois because it had a good chemistry program. So I came back here, went to the University of Illinois, and then went back. Actually, I didn't go back to Denver really. What I started doing was applying for jobs, and I got a job offer from Albuquerque. And that's the reason I moved there. We moved there in 1968, and I've lived there ever since. I do come back to Marshall quite often because, as I said, I have two avocations. One is working for the homeless shelter, which I really like doing. And I'll be honest with you, I don't do it so much because I think I'm helping mankind. I'm really helping myself. It keeps me in contact with people. It keeps me very alert because I do all the computer work down there. And I have to socialize a lot and so on. So I do it actually more for me than I do for them. But either way, we both get helped. And so I work down there almost a half a day every day. And I've done that now for 15 years. And the other thing I have is I've really fallen in love with doing family history. And so that's the reason I came back to Marshall this time. And that's primarily the reason I've come back to Marshall in years past. I really love it. I like doing it. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of investigation. And so I just finished a book, I say just, is about 6 months ago on the very early Tapscotts. It had nothing to do with Marshall. And took them down to the time that they moved to Marshall and stopped there. And now I'm working on the book that has to do with the Tapscotts coming to Clark County. They came from Kentucky. And so I'm working on a second book. Actually, I've worked on several books, but only 3 major ones. And this one right here will cover Marshall. It'll cover Marshall to a large extent. Marshall and Clark County, and undoubtedly mention Damien and people I knew and so on, but it's going to mention just, the trouble is it's gotten too big. It's gotten just to be out of hand because I have more information than I know what to do with.
You had already published one book, as I recall.
Yes, I actually have 2 books.
Okay.
Actually, I have several books. I wrote a book for my wife, which has nothing to do with our discussion here. I wrote a book on my wife's family. And it's quite large. I'm really quite proud of it, but it has absolutely nothing to do with this because my wife is not from here. My wife she's a Midwesterner like us, but she's actually from Kansas City, and then later on, they moved to El Paso, just like we were from here, and we moved to Albuquerque. And then the other 2 books is I wrote a book strictly about my immediate family. And there I mentioned Damien. I mentioned undoubtedly Peggy Hollenbeck, all the kids I just got through talking about. And it's really about a lot of it's about my childhood, not totally, but a lot of it's about my childhood. But my brothers and sisters all contributed to that too. And then I wrote a book about the very early Tapscotts from when they first came to the United States. No, that wasn't the United States then, when they first came to America. My great, that 6th great grandfather came here, his name was Henry, came to Virginia in January of 1700. And then they spread out. And eventually, one of my particular line ended up in Kentucky. The person that came there was an itinerant preacher who was extremely poor. And I have a feeling not a very good preacher, but just because of things I've heard. One of his sons was I'm sorry, that was William. I may have said Henry. William came to Kentucky. William the preacher, and then he had a son named Henry, and Henry came as the one that came to Clark County. And like I said, he left Kentucky around around 1835. Took 5 years crossing Indiana. I'm not certain quite what he did during those 5 years. I know he had three kids. He had some kids before he left. He had 3 kids during his traverse of Indiana, and in 1840 he entered Darwin, had some more kids. They had 9 kids total, and then moved into Anderson Township. So anyway, that's the book I'm writing now. I'm writing about his descendants, and all the way down, almost to the present time, probably to the present time.
Where are you finding most of your research on those books?
Oh geez, everywhere. This time I found, for some strange reason, well actually a good stuff, part of the stuff of course comes from the Clark County courthouse in Marshall, and that's been extremely useful. The second good choice is, it turns out the Vigo County Library has some really good stuff. And for example, they've taken all the marriage records from the originals and photostat and put them on the internet. And they also have a lot of obituaries and so on. So I found those to be quite useful. And actually the Marshall Library has been extremely useful because they have this whole series of newspapers on the web, which makes very, very useful. I use that extensively. My only disappointment is that the old newspapers often didn't report the news you wish they'd report. As anyone who's ever read them realizes, they tended to get lazy and all they do is swipe information from other newspapers. So it turns out that often you'll find more news about, let's say, Indianapolis in the Marshall paper than you would have found about Marshall. And even more news about Europe. I think probably what happened was, back in those days, the towns were so small, they figured you knew everything already locally. Okay. So why tell about that? Let's tell about everything else. So I've found a lot about that. I've also found, it's been quite interesting, but I'm not certain, well, you probably maybe want this information. I found I had in the family a number of rather wicked people, actually. I have found, this is true, this is very true. On the Tapscott side, I found 2 people who were murderers, and they were actually not that distant relative of mine. One was a great-great-uncle. These are Clark County Tapscotts now. And his name was Samuel Tapscott. He murdered a guy in 1871. He murdered a guy with a shovel in Terre Haute, Indiana. A fellow by the name of Johnson. I don't remember what Johnson's first name was. Murdered him with a shovel, and yet he got off. And I was able to get the court proceedings. This trip, I just got him yesterday. On this trip, got the court proceedings, and I'm starting to go through them and trying to figure out why the jury let him go. It was actually, was it 9-man jury, so it was 7-4 acquittal and 2 against, and they were able to sway the 2 against, and finally the whole thing, they let him go. They shouldn't have let him go, by the way, because about 6 years later, he robbed a guy here in Marshall, beat him up and robbed him. And I never found it yet. I'm still looking to see what the court records for that say, because I'm not certain what happened, but I know they didn't lock him up because 2 years later, he died rather unexpectedly as a free man in a barn. They found him in a barn outside Marshall, dead, and they don't know why he died. And so that was Samuel. The other person I had that's the murderer on the Tapscott side, the fellow by the name of Omar Tapscott. Now he's much more recent. He lived in the early part of the 20th century, so he lived in around 1930, 1940. He murdered a guy in Charleston, Illinois, over a poker game. It's an interesting story, but he was into gambling, and Charleston was apparently well known for having a lot of gambling dens, a lot. And he got in a fight, went home and got a gun, and came back and killed him. He wasn't given a very big sentence. He was given something like 6 to 8 years. I assume he served those. I haven't been able to prove that yet. But they let him out because 10 years later, he was rearrested for gambling again, but this time he didn't kill anyone. That was Omar. I could talk with him freely. He had absolutely no descendants. So Samuel had some descendants, but I haven't been able to trace it. Samuel's descendants, once Samuel got in trouble and went to prison, he went to prison for a third time. This is after the murder. This is after beating up the guy. He finally ended up in prison on account I do not know what. At that point, I lose all track of his family. I feel like his wife may have changed her name. His wife was a Tingley. And I'm still trying to trace her down because my family is actually very closely related to Tingleys. I have an uncle in Tingley. A lot of Tingleys here. Well, there's one of those Tingleys. One of the other Tingleys of Clark County. She married. Her name is Susan Tingley. I just lost him. So he had some descendants, but that was a long time ago. Remember, he was living in 1871. Now, Omar is living much more recently, but Omar had no descendants. He had never got married, never had any kids, as far as we know.
Bob, I was smiling when you were saying this because so many times people working on genealogy, they find a skeleton in the closet and suddenly, poof, that's it. They don't want to pursue that anymore.
Oh, no.
And that's so strange because about all of us have some family member who's been off the beaten path.
Actually, it excites me that happened, although I shouldn't say this is terribly unchristian. But I like it when I find something like that because I'll tell you the truth, otherwise what you're going to say is, so-and-so was born, so-and-so farmed, so-and-so died, so-and-so farmed, he had a kid, he farmed, he got married, he died. I mean, it gets very, very boring. And this, on the other side of the family, I got something really interesting. I've got a serial killer on my mother's side. And I can tell this story because it's actually been in the newspaper, all over the newspaper. There's even been a book written about it. One of my uncle Chris Imels, now he's not Chris Imel, he would be my great uncle, he's been long dead. My uncle Chris Imel he lived across the street from my grandpa, Adam Imel, down below Grand Turntrip. He lived on the other side of Route 1. They lived kind of across the street from each other. My uncle Chris Imel had a granddaughter, whose name I won't mention. But anyway, he had a granddaughter who ended up marrying a man and they started running a store of some sort, a shop or something in Indianapolis and made some pretty good money. They had a farm that was a fairly nice farm, but I don't think he was doing much farming on it. He was just primarily living there because they like country life. I think it's called the Fox Hill Farm, north of Indianapolis. Well, what happened is one day someone found some bones out in his backyard. Now this is roughly 1950, 60, so it's been fairly recently, 1950 let's say. I think it might have been 1960 actually. They found some bones out in his backyard and they did some investigation and found 3 bodies out there.
Oh my.
And then they started realizing that, it turns out they were all gay men. They don't know whether he was gay or he hated gays, or in some cases, some people are gay themselves and they kill other people because they feel like they reflect badly on them. They don't know. But there's 3 homosexual men whose bodies were found in the backyard. Actually, they were young men, very young men, boys almost. And then they realized that in the same area that he had been, there had been a number of other gay men disappear. They found bodies for them, and they realized they were all along the route that this guy drove every day. And they started putting 2 to 2 together. They know he killed those 3 in the backyard. They aren't certain of the other, but there was a total of 15 people they think he killed. And they wrote a book about this. It's called Where the Bodies Are Buried. And so there's a book about my relative. Now, remember, he's a relative by marriage. There's a book about this relative. It's called Where the Bodies Are Buried. You can actually get it. And actually, they put a version of it on television on the Arts and Entertainment, A&E channel. But before they could bring him to trial, and this has been quite recently, before they could bring him to trial, he committed suicide. Never admitting that he had done anything, but they're pretty certain he did. So he's the serial killer. And that probably made the papers here in Marshall quite a little bit at the time. Like I said, it may have been more like 1960. It was not all that terribly long ago. And if I ever write a book about that side of the family, and I may not, but that's not Tapscott's, I'll put that in there only because it's already been put all over the streets, on television, in a book, newspaper articles, and so on. And so I don't feel so bad about saying anything about it. I certainly don't feel bad about Omar or Samuel either. As I said, Samuel's descendants, first of all, that was a long, terribly long time ago. That was well over 100 years ago. And that's almost a century and a half ago. Anyway, I feel like you can't hurt people's feelings now with something that happened that long ago. And Omar didn't have any descendants anyway, so it doesn't make any difference.
You've got some interesting relatives, it sounds like, and some things that you've well documented. This love for reading and your love for writing and all, and you mentioned the first book and you read it on the curb. Did you spend any time in the Marshall Library when you were?
Yes, actually quite a little bit. And I'm going to spend a lot more today, actually. In fact, this was my library day. I'm going to spend time this morning seeing more of what they have here. And then I'm going to go to the genealogical library. And I've been to both places quite extensively. Yeah, I spend a lot of time here. And I'm hoping to see more today. Now, the Marshall Library, I'm sorry to tell you, David, does not have an extensive family history collection.
Right.
But it may have a lot more than what I think. Every time I go to a library and relook, I realize I've missed a whole lot. Same thing reason for the genealogy library. The trouble with the genealogy library is, to tell you the truth, it's not, no, I better not say anything. Could you edit out anything? It's not as well run as the Marshall Library, if you want to know the truth.
Oh, yeah.
The Marshall Library is extraordinarily modern. I'm not talking about just the physical facilities. I'm talking about their collections, the way they handle stuff, the way they handle people, the fact they use the internet. They really know how to use the internet. The online newspapers. It amazes me what they have here. The genealogy library is a little bit, shall we say, shabby. And it's not anyone's fault. I think they probably don't have the money to run the thing. They do have a lot of stuff over there, but it's fairly hard to find stuff. Although I'm hoping for better luck today. There are still some things, some mysteries I'd like to solve about the Tapscott, since that's right now. One of the mysteries is that buried out in Auburn Cemetery, there is a Wesley Tapscott, who we have no idea who he is. We know a lot about him, but we have no idea who he's descended from. We even know he apparently is very closely related to Henry Tapscott, who came here to Clark County, because he's born in the same county, in Kentucky. There's thought that he's probably Henry's son, but if he is, he doesn't show up anywhere else as Henry's son. So I've got a huge amount of documentation. I'm just immense, because he was in the Civil War. I have loads and loads of, I actually have, at latest count, I have 86 records on him. But they're primarily medical records, because he did not do well medically. That's when he was trying to get a pension. He did get a pension. There are military records. There are records of he was put in a home in Quincy. It was the sailors, called the Soldiers and Sailors, Illinois Soldiers and Sailors Home in Quincy, Illinois. He was there for a while. He finally came back to Marshall, and around 1890, it must be 1895, very close to that anyway, 1895, he died here in Marshall of a variety of things he claimed he'd picked up during his service, and he may very well have. Anyway, that's one mystery. And then I've got a mystery that the Marshall Library gave me, unfortunately. In one of their newspapers they have online, they have a single paragraph that says, Henry Tapscott died on this date, at this age, in this place. That's all they have. There is no Henry Tapscott that I know that was in that place of that age on that date that could possibly have died. It was in Clark County this happened. He almost certainly has to be a relative, but boy, I sure can't figure out. He's not the Henry that came from Kentucky, for example. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's the other big mystery I have. I keep thinking maybe someone blew the name. Maybe it wasn't Henry Tapscott. Maybe it was Henry Thompson or something.
How about travelers? Someone coming through that could have had that name and expired here in.
Well, you wouldn't think that, except it said something about it said something about being a long-time resident of the county. So I think it had 3 sentences. It said Henry Tapscott, age something, a long-time resident of the county, died. I think it said something like last Thursday. That was it. That was absolutely it. I mean, nothing else. It actually stated he'd been here for a while. There is no Henry Tapscott. There's no one's been here for a while. At that time, there was other Henry Tapscotts before, there were Henry Tapscotts afterwards, but not. So that's the other big mystery I'd like to clear up, but I don't think I'm going to be able to find out. I keep thinking I'm going to see something else in the newspaper that's published online by the Marshall Library, or something over the Genealogy Library, or some sort of a hint somewhere. Back then, people were not very good at getting death certificates. There are a lot of people who died without death certificates. Wesley Tapscott, the guy who I can't figure out where he came from, died without a death certificate, in spite of the fact he died here in town. In spite of the fact his will was probated. His will, by the way, says absolutely nothing about who he's related to.
With all of the records and everything that you're accumulating, and obviously you must have volumes and volumes, how are you cataloging and documenting those?
That's very difficult. I started out doing a lot of paper copies. Now I'm doing a lot of stuff, putting it on, I'm digitizing it. I'm sorry, when I say digitize, I'm making photocopies of it, electronic photocopies, scanning them. And so I'd like to have 100% scanned, to tell you the truth. I'd like to get rid of all of my files. If Marshall Library, by the way, wants my files, I have to do something with those things someday. I've got a huge amount of paper, but to tell you the truth, most libraries don't have the room for them. I'd be glad to give them to them because I've got to get rid of this stuff sometime. I've got just an enormous amount of, in some cases, the stuff I couldn't scan, so I had to get paper copies. Sometimes I scan them at home. I got a nice scan at home. But most of the stuff has been unscanned. I imagine I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably 5 file drawers full of documents, and then a whole bunch laying around my desk at home. If Marshall Library wants them, they can have them, but they don't want them, I don't think.
Have you met Allison, the new library director here?
That was not the second person I talked to this morning.
No.
That was, no, I haven't.
Okay, I'll introduce you to her when she's done, because she's a new director. She just took over a couple months ago from Nancy Claypool, who was here 17 years.
Okay.
A lot of the improvements have happened. Bob, you did not mention there's a young lady, I think now named Mary Tapscott, who you reside with, and when did you meet her, and where, and what year were you married?
Well, I sound like some of my relatives who refuse for some reason or other in some of the documents I found to say anything at all about their wives, which has been caused a massive amount of confusion. It turns out that, I'm trying to think, it must have been my last year of college. So this has been 1963, I think. Not my last year, I should say, of undergraduate school, not before I went to graduate school. I had a job offer from 3M Company in Minneapolis. I was going to school in Boulder, Colorado, to University of Colorado in Boulder. 1963, my senior year. My senior year had not grown yet, so it must have been in the end of my junior year. I had a job offer from the 3M Company to come and do summer work for them. They like to hire college kids because they thought they could get them as full-time employees later on. So I went there to do research in a chemical lab there. And while I was there, I stayed at a fraternity house called Alpha Chi Sigma Fraternity because I was a member, actually I was the president of Alpha Chi Sigma Fraternity at Colorado. And I knew the people out there, and it's cheap. It's a very cheap, stay at a fraternity house, real cheap. And I needed cheapness. So I stayed at the fraternity house there right off the University of Minnesota campus, in spite of the fact that my trip out there had absolutely nothing to do with the University of Minnesota. But I stayed at the University of Minnesota, then I traveled over to St. Paul each day to work for 3M. 3M was in St. Paul. Of course, the two cities are so close together, you can't separate them. And while I was at the fraternity house, one of my fraternity brothers came up to me one day and said, "Hey, there's a dance going on over at the dorms. And my girlfriend has a friend and she needs a date. Would you like to come over, at least meet her?" And I said, "Okay." So I did. And the girlfriend was Mary Frances Summers, who was there for the summer also. She's just like me. She's there for a summer job. She had nothing to do with the University of Minnesota. Well, I guess indirectly it did. She was working on she was a math major. She was working on helping to prepare a math textbook. And the offices to prepare that textbook was at the University of Minnesota. For some reason, they picked that. I don't know why. It's called the Madison Project. And so she said she went out with me. And she said the main reason she went out with me at first is because the dorms were so darn hot. They weren't air conditioned at that time.
That's right.
Yeah, there was actually a state law against air conditioning dormitories in Minnesota. This is true in 1963. Anyway, I kind of dated her long distance for a year or so later afterwards. We didn't see each other all that often. We wrote each other a lot. I came back every now and then to meet her. She was going to Webster College in St. Louis at the time. Webster was a Catholic girls' school. And so I was in Boulder, Colorado. She's at Webster College. And so we kind of met off and on and eventually got married. She was something I had never dated before or known anything about before. She was a Catholic, and I was not a Catholic. I was a Protestant. And I thought, here I am dating a Catholic girl. I am now officially a Catholic, whatever that means, because I'm really only half a Catholic. I always tell her I'm half Protestant, half Catholic. I attend a Catholic church back in Denver, or back in Albuquerque, rather. But nonetheless, so that's Mary Frances. We have one kid. We got married in 1966. We got married on an easy date to remember because we got married on New Year's Eve. In 1966. People say, "Why did you get married on New Year's Eve?" I said, "Well, Mary Frances and I, we were at a party, New Year's Eve party. We both got drunk and got married." Of course, I had nothing to do with it. We actually picked New Year's Eve because we were working, our friends were working. It's the only time we really get off of work. Because we got married in St. Genevieve, Missouri. St. Genevieve, Missouri is where my wife's parents came from, that area. Well, actually, really her mother. Her father came from that area, but not from St. Genevieve. In fact, the book I just got through writing about our family was primarily a St. Genevieve book. Anyway, we got married in St. Genevieve on December 31st, 1966. And about 2 years later, had a kid. We've only had one, Michael. Michael is right now a instructor of massage therapy, believe it or not, at the community college in Phoenix, Arizona. For a long time, he ran a homeless shelter, actually. For a long time, that's misleading. For about 3 years. He ran a homeless shelter. He actually had a variety of jobs. He worked for Princess Resorts to run their spa for quite a while. Then he quit that job because he didn't like the way they treated people. He went to work for a homeless shelter. He wrote a book, actually. He's a much better writer than I am. He wrote a book. I'm going to give it a blurb here because I want people to buy the book. It's a great book. It's truly a great book. I'm not kidding. In fact, I should give a copy. I'm going to send a copy to the library here. It's called Homeless Hero. And it's about his experience working with the homeless. But really, when you realize it's as much about him as it is about the homeless. He's one of these talented people who can take a story about one thing and suddenly it becomes a story about something different, or at least related to it. He's got some wonderful, great stuff in there that he did, which is just amazing me. For example, one of the things he did, decided he had to learn about homelessness, was one day, this was on the spur of the moment, he planned this ahead of time. One day he emptied his pockets of all his identification and everything, walked across Phoenix, Arizona from his house to the homeless shelter because he knew they had no automobiles. Most people don't, not all. And act as a homeless man for the next 24 hours or 48 hours. No identification, no money, no nothing. Just so he could learn about it. And that's in his book. It's really very, very interesting. Homeless Hero is a great book. And I almost said you guys a free copy. I'd give it to you, but I don't have it with me.
Has he plans to write additional books?
I hope so. You know, all parents say this about their kids. And so you can't really trust parents when they talk about their kids. I think he's a wonderful writer. He's much, much better than I am. Much better. He's just an amazing writer. I've always been disappointed he didn't do more with it. But it's hard to make money as a writer. In fact, it's almost impossible to make money as a writer unless you're one of those fortunate few who have a bestseller. You just aren't going to make money at it. You're going to end up probably losing money. He sold a lot of his books. He did he won the grand prize in the Southwest Book Festival. It was held in Hollywood, California.
Wow.
And he actually had well, I was going to say a producer, but that's an exaggeration. The person connected with the movie industry out there asked him about turning his book into a
That's what I was
movie.
wondering about.
But, you know, it never really panned out. And I don't think he really pushed it very hard. And I'm not 100% certain to make a good movie, although it could. It might make a very good movie. But I think they'd have to change some things. You have to make something more exciting. It's a gripping book when I don't say it's a great book so much as it's an interesting book. It's one you don't want to put down. But it's not gripping. And I think they need gripping for a movie. Anyway, he won grand prize. He won the outstanding book in all categories in that thing. This was 2 years ago. And then more recently, he's run some other minor things. They've been primarily, you know, best nonfiction, best this, best that, but specific categories. But in that case, it was the whole Southwest region for that year. And I was quite proud of him for that. He's a good writer. And then I have two grandkids. Both, of course, who are super grandkids. So you can't put that down because it turns out all grandparents say their kids' grandkids are super grandkids. But one's going to Rice University, and one is going to Arizona State University. The one in Arizona State University is actually president of the student body, and the one that's going to Rice is right now in Argentina studying Spanish. That's not going to be his major, but his major is actually electrical engineering. But he studied Spanish mainly because it's a good language to know. And he already had a really strong background in Spanish. So he had his chance to go live with a Spanish family in Argentina. So that's
Wow, that'd be an experience.
Yeah. I've never been to Argentina myself. So.
Bob, you've given quite an insight into your early experience in life here in Marshall, and obviously you've come back several times to visit. Is there anything in particular you say that, gee, this has really changed, or the way Marshall looks, or maybe some things that haven't changed that you thought might?
Well, no, actually, it turns out that the overall city looks to me very much the same. What has happened is certain things have sprung up and certain things have gone away. Things that have gone away really hit me hard. One is of course, the theater burned down since I left. That was a marvelous theater. It was, at least for us kids, it was a grand theater of the grand theater styles in the United States at one time. I used to go there on Saturday afternoons, every Saturday afternoon as a kid. Saw cowboy shows. Did you?
And I always enjoyed the cereal because it left you up in the air and you had to come back next week to see what happened.
I always said it's a story on the installment plan.
It was the old Strand Theater.
It was the old Strand Theater. They showed Rocket Man. I remember Rocket Man in particular, but there was a lot of other serials that they had on. Cowboy shows. They usually had a cartoon. And it was extremely cheap. Now, I've always told people, my memory is probably not good. I remember it being 9 cents. Can that be right?
That's exactly right.
Why would I don't know why they would charge you 9 cents.
I think the adult price was 25 cents. I'm not real positive on that one. But I remember going for 9 cents and the Saturdays. Boy, that was an easy afternoon experience. And also I remember course, there were no televisions then. They always had the newsreels in
Yes, that's
between
right.
the serial and the main film.
Yeah. So anyway, that was one thing I've missed, is the fact that the Strand is no longer there. There is no theater, I guess, in Marshall anymore. That was a marvelous Saturday afternoon experience, because we used to do that. It was a way for the parents to park their kids in a safe place and cheap. Because even then, 9 cents was pretty darn cheap. Most people could afford 9 cents. And then popcorn, I think, was 10 cents. I think popcorn was one penny more, if I remember right. The other thing that's missing, of course, is Radiomakers. Radiomakers, we used to go there, Radiomakers, and go there and order whatever it was to order, Cokes or pop or something, and watch the bottling machine works. I used to love to watch the bottles go around. They would get filled up and capped and put into cases, and I'd watch them do that. So Radiomakers is missing. I can still remember doing that a lot.
And they made double cola, and then
Yes.
they had orange and several different things, flavors too.
The Candy Kitchen is missing. Candy Kitchen was not really so much for us kids, because it was really more of a high school hangout. But we used to go there every now and then. They had a very long, I guess, a long counter there, and I think it was white, if I remember right. It used to stretch down the length of the place, at least as kids it did. And it's gone. But that was primarily a teenager hangout, because I think there's more high school kids in there than little kids. I could be wrong about that, but that's my Cole's Pool Room.
Oh my, yes.
Cole's Pool Room is the place that my mother told me to stay away from, because it was full of evil, wicked men who didn't have anything better than than sit in there and play pool and smoke cigars. It's not like the pool rooms you see so much anymore. A lot of pool rooms anymore are very young men. At that time, it was middle-aged men. And they were all cigar smokers. It was very dark and gloomy. And the reason I know so much about it is because I was a paperboy deliverer, and the papers were all piled up on this
corner.
Around the corner. That's exactly right. And if I remember right, we had to go into Cole's at times and do something about those papers. Maybe Cole's handled them, or I think he's the one that
It was
ordered them.
a newsstand and a distributor for the paper.
That's it. So I guess we had to go in there and either report to him what we'd done or give him our money or something. But my mother said she didn't want us in there any more than we had to. But I remember Cole's. I thought Cole's was really quite interesting. It struck me as being very dark, very woody on the inside, but I could be wrong, because a little kid has different feelings about things than people today would have. It was interesting. Cole's was really interesting. And then there was the other thing I saw was missing was there used to be a hatchery and meat locker plant. I think it was run by Hearst. I could be wrong about the name.
Harvey Hearst.
Harvey Hearst had something to do with it, or his father had something.
And there was an Anderson hatchery also.
Okay. Anyway, I noticed those things are not there anymore. At least if they are, I don't remember where they were. We used to go there because my dad, what people did back in those days is a lot of people didn't have freezers. And they would buy up half a cow, half a steer, and have it cut up, and they'd freeze it. Like, we used to go down there every Saturday, pick up some cuts of meat for the following week. And then we'd watch them, because either the hatchery is part of it or the hatchery is just next door. I don't remember, but we'd go and watch the little chickens. But we used the meat locker a lot. I guess I don't suppose people use meat lockers anymore. Everyone has a freezer. Yeah.
On 6th Street here, there's a new building there now, but reproduced the old one was the Spots Meat Market. And it was this mini grocery store, but they had a locker plant in the back, and I know that's where my folks always had their.
So we never went there. We went down to there's one south.
There's one on the south.
First, maybe, or not even first. I don't remember. When I say first, I meant
It would have been about 8th or so. And that building was just torn down a few years ago.
Yeah.
It was Drake's locker.
That sounds very familiar. I think that was it, yeah. Yeah, anyway, that's something. The other thing I remember, things I remember as a kid, and you undoubtedly remember this too, is number one is milkmen. They were always men. And I remember going out in the morning, and you'd find in the wintertime that plug of milk, sometimes forced up through the top with a cardboard circular piece at the top of the
Right
boat.
at the top.
And the other thing I remember is icemen. People would have deliver ice to people's houses. And I suspect it was to people who did not have refrigerators and still were using ice boxes. That's the only reason I can figure why icemen would be delivering ice. We had a refrigerator, so we didn't have to worry about it. They'd come down the street and they'd give us a piece of ice off the back of their truck. And so as icemen and milkmen are the two things that they just don't exist anymore.
Do you remember the card that they used to hang in the windows? It would have different sizes, 25, 50, 100 on, and they would hang that in the window, and that let the icemen know what the size of the ice block they needed.
Dimly I do. But since we didn't get it, see, we didn't have to worry about it, we didn't do it. The other thing I remember is getting coal delivered to our house.
Oh my, yes.
We had a downstairs, they had a whole room set aside with a
Cool.
coal chute going into it, and you get coal delivered. People don't do that anymore either. But that just happened, I don't know, a couple of times a year maybe. Maybe once a year, I don't remember, it wasn't too often.
Do you remember the Kraft cheese plant?
No, I don't, sorry.
Okay.
Don't remember the craft
The
sheet.
building is still there. It's used for another purpose, obviously, now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's other things that, of course, I used to always go to the barber shop across down here on Archer, and I can't remember whose barber shop it's called then. This had been back in, back before 1951. Anyway, you should go down there on Saturdays, not every Saturday, but probably every other Saturday.
Barney's? Barney's?
Could have been. The thing I remember about it is the fact that if you sit in a chair, there's a set of mirrors across from you and a set of mirrors behind you. And you can see yourself in the mirror, looking at 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 yourself in the mirror. Dozens, maybe 100, probably not 100, dozens of images of you until they faded out of sight. But they really didn't fade out of sight because the mirrors were never quite parallel to each other, so you kind of veer off to the right. I remember doing that as a kid, and you always got a piece of candy afterwards. I think the barbershop is still there.
There's just one barber shop in town now. It used to be Chet's. Chet Irwin had that for years and years. He passed away a few years ago.
That sounds familiar. Was Chet, when did Chet start cutting hair, do you know?
I don't know.
See, that name sounds really familiar.
It was decades that he cut hair.
Yeah.
And Felix owns it now, a young man, or younger man.
I've heard about Phoenix, but that's been way past my time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But Chet, I'm certain it's the same barber shop.
I bet it was.
In fact, I'd like to go in there and see if they sell the same set of mirrors. There were two barber shops when I was a kid. The other one was down here, maybe, I don't know, south of here a little bit, I think. But when I say south of here, I mean a couple blocks from Archer. Was there a barber shop? It seemed like it was on North-South Street. Anyway, it doesn't make any difference. We never went there, ever.
At one time, there was a black gentleman named Squab Wilson that had a barber shop on North 6th.
Don't know anything about that one.
And as a youngster, I had my hair cut in there a number of times.
Yeah, no, we always went to the same one. We always went to this one
I
down
bet
there.
it was Chet's.
And then we always went to the same doctor, Dr. Ilias. At that time, there was not very many doctors in town. Maybe not still may not be very many doctors. The only thing I remember about Ilias is back in those days, the doctors would come to your house. We went to the doctor's office only one time the entire time I was a young kid. And that was when my brother broke his arm. Actually, there's twice. One time I said there's nothing else bad to happen. That's not quite true. My sister Mary Ann got her toe cut off on a bicycle chain, believe it or not. She was riding a bicycle barefoot. She shouldn't have been.
Oh,
she had to go to the hospital. She had to go to the doctor's office for that. And then they had to take her to the hospital, but she recovered fairly quickly.
oh goodness.
But Dr. used to come to your house. You didn't go to people's offices. I guess that's unheard of today. I mean, you'd have to be on your deathbed before they come to your house, and then they'd send an ambulance after you anyway.
Yeah, I don't think they'd even come then, probably.
But back then they always came. I can remember doctors come to our house. If you had anything, they'd come to your house. I wonder why they did that after, actually, now that I think about it. Maybe because some people didn't have cars. I
It was a tradition because people could not get out of their houses, I think, going back to the time when they were on horseback.
Yes, that's right. Anyway, that's the other thing I did. But no, Marshall has not really changed very much. I noticed the bandstand's still over there. Is the bandstands, do they still have band concerts?
Every Friday night at 8 o'clock,
So there'll be a band concert tomorrow night.
there will be one tomorrow night. I played in the band for 35 years straight.
Is that
And stepped down a couple of years ago just saying, hey, it's time for the next generation. But I enjoyed it, but it's still active, and they just redid a lot of renovation of the bandstand proper itself. And there's about 48 people, I believe, in the band now. Started in 1875.
I'll be darned.
It's the longest continuing operating band in, well, one of the few in the country.
Well, when I was going there, the fellow that ran it was Arnie. Last name was Arnie.
Von Arnie.
Von Arnie, that's
He
it.
taught music in the high school.
Yes, that's right. He tried to teach me clarinet. He was not successful. But my cousin, Anne Marie Einel, like I said, she's lived just north of town here. She played in the band. She played the flute for a long time. But the band concerts, geez, we never missed a band concert. I mean, literally never missed a band concert. Used to be a lot of things going on at the courthouse, and maybe there still are, but I know some of the things have been abolished. They had greased pole climbs. They had greased pig catches. I'm certain those have been abolished.
Some of those things have moved to like the county fair.
Okay. The county fair, yes. I used to go to the fair all the time. That was. Well, I won't say all the time. Whenever it came to town, obviously. The one thing I remember is the 4th of July. They used to have a big fireworks display.
That's still very much of a big tradition.
Well, we kids, when I was young, we did a lot of things we shouldn't have done. The kids in my neighborhood, I don't know if you were among this or not. Probably not, because you were too nice a guy. We used to go out there the next day and we'd find all the unburnt fireworks, because there'd be fireworks that never went off. They'd light the fuse, they'd burn up the thing and there'd be a dud. And we'd take those things and we'd break them open. God, we'd be lucky we didn't get killed. And put them and shake them into a pile and ignite them. And one time we were doing it, we had such a big pile, we were afraid to ignite it, so we had it on a piece of paper or something. We drugged it underneath the grandstand, not underneath the grandstand, but the back of it, so you could climb up to the top, and we dropped matches on it until it went off. Geez, that was dangerous. No one got killed, by the way.
No, I did not participate in that one, Bob.
That's not true. That really happened. But there was a lot of unexploded fireworks. People don't know that, but at least at that time, that's probably not true anymore, but there were a lot of unexploded fireworks then. But anyway, that's another thing we did as a kid. I really love Marshall. Actually, the only thing I don't like about Marshall, the only thing, is the weather. I'm from Albuquerque, and I'll tell you the truth, you get used to the nice weather out there. It's very, very dry, which means even in the summer it doesn't get very hot. In the winter it doesn't get very cold. People don't realize that. They always think of Albuquerque being desert. Well, it is desert, but it's high desert. We're exactly a mile high. Same distance up as Denver. And so we have wonderful weather all the time. We enjoy the rain. In fact, we enjoy the rain so much that if it rains, this is true, people will go outside and stand in it. They think, this is really great, it's raining. So rain doesn't bother us at all. But it's dry most of the time, and quite sunny. The clouds and the skies are usually always clear. And relatively cool in the summer. We almost never break 100, almost never.
Okay.
In fact, we've gone for a year or two without ever hitting 100. And in the winter, it turns out it gets quite cold at night, but during the day, it warms way up again. There's a huge difference between day and night.
Are you in the area that's having problems with the water and source of fresh water?
Not yet. It's a worry. Mm-hmm. For some reason, this has been the wettest year we've had. And so I think the worry is starting to go away a little bit. No, there's predictions made and worries. Right now, we don't know. Right now, there's no restrictions. Well, that's not true. There's always restrictions. For instance, you're only supposed to water 3 times a week and so on in your yard. So there are restrictions, but those have been in place for years and years. No, there's right now, no, but there's been worry that we're going to be. If you do some calculations and predictions and look at the population increase and how much water there is available and so on. See, we're almost 100% well water.
Yeah.
The Rio Grande Valley is was not cut out. Rio Grande goes right through Albuquerque. Well, more or less goes through Albuquerque, a little bit to the west, on the west side of town. Anyway, and the valley was not carved out by the Rio Grande. It was actually filled in by the Rio Grande. It's a huge rift valley. It's literally a rift valley. It's like you get from two plates lying apart. And what happens is it's one of the largest rift valleys in the world, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or whatever. But what happens, the river filled it in with sand, so there was a huge amount of silt in it. Some people claim as much as a mile deep in silt, or a half mile away of silt, just nothing but silt. And so it's a reservoir for water. Water travels underground, and so it travels all the way from Colorado down through our state, underground through the silt. There's not very much of the Rio Grande on top. There is some, but it's not. It's hard to drown. It'd be hard to drown in the Rio Grande, real hard.
And they keep pulling off water as it goes down the stream.
Yeah. And so what happens is we use well water there for the city. So the city's 100% well water. There's no reservoir water at all, and there's no. We don't get water out of the Rio Grande to speak of. Some of the farmers take some off the Rio Grande, but not much. We do take it out of the Rio Grande, but we don't take it what's on top. We take it from what's below. So yeah, but I like Albuquerque. It's got its advantages. This place right here, I've got a lot of very emotional feelings about Marshall because like I said, I grew up here, but I could never come back mainly because of the weather.
It's been just a delight visiting with you again, Bob, and we've done a lot of reminiscing here. A couple questions I'll just ask you. Is there some event or person in your life that has really left an indelible impression?
Well, sure, my wife. Person, I mean, yes. I think that'd have to be number one and probably number two and number three.
Okay.
As far as the event goes, living here, obviously, I've always told people that I thought Marshall probably, my few years, 7 years is all, in Marshall did more to change me than anything else. I mean, it defined what I was. It truly defines what you are. Still have a small town personality, I think. It's just different. I really liked my childhood. My childhood was just great. Absolutely stupendous. It couldn't have been any better. I mean, growing up in Marshall, I mean, crime was essentially zero. Say you could turn kids out in the street all you wanted to. It was absolutely, and everyone knew you. Everyone knew you. You go all over town and they say, "You're Mary's kid, aren't you? Why are you over here in this side of town?" or don't do that, or I'm going to tell your dad on you. Everybody knew you. Everybody knew you.
With the modern conveniences and all that we have, is there something in particular as an invention or something we have today that you say, gosh, I just could not live without that?
Well, for what I do now, it'd be the computer. But not, I don't use it very much for communicating at all. I'm not one of these people though I'm getting to be, unfortunately, but not one of these people that's always texting and so on. It's primarily when I'm writing books. To write without a computer is almost impossible. Really, it's the computer I use for two things, and I really need them. Number one is I use it for writing books, and number two is I use it both at home and even more so at the homeless shelter for keeping track of things. I write databases, for example, so I use it a lot for databases. Other than that, that's the only reason. I think you can go overboard on the computer, but boy, for writing, do you remember back in the old days you have to sit there and write everything by hand? And then see, I can't read my own writing. And the nice thing about it is you can make a mistake and you can change it real fast. That's the big thing, is the computer. Mainly because I've used it a lot. When I was a professor, for example, I used it a lot. I did a lot of my work on the computer. But that's, I don't know, I think they're using it the wrong way probably in many cases. For instance, I've never been able to use Facebook. I'm on Facebook, I've never used it ever. ever. I got on it only because I thought it would help me make contact with people for the genealogy stuff. I'm on Facebook. I never use it. I'm on other sites of that type. I never use them ever. I use email a lot. A whole lot. And the reason I use email a lot is because I don't like talking to people over the phone. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say. And not only that, you got there in writing so that they know exactly what you want, and you get an exact answer, and you can say that that's right. So I love emails, but not for the way you think. It's the fact. I just don't like talking to people on the phone at all. For one thing, I think I sometimes hang up and I think, geez, I should have said that. I should have said this.
Yeah. Bob, we've talked a lot about Marshall, and you've obviously got some fond memories of it. If you were living or went to the other side of the globe, and say you were in England or somewhere in Europe, and someone said, Marshall, where's that? Or what's that about? What would you tell them about Marshall and why it's a good place to either visit or maybe live?
Oh boy. Well, see, I'd have to say it's a good place to live as a kid. It's probably a good place to live as an adult, but I don't know this as an adult. Not really, because I haven't lived here as an adult. To live here as a kid is for exactly what I told you. It is a nice, it gives you a warm feeling being in Marshall. It gives you a warm feeling to know everyone in town knows you. It also gives you a bad feeling to know that everyone in town knows you.
Be careful.
Yes, but it's nice. I mean, it's for kids, it's wonderful. I mean, gee whiz, look, you got fields out. I used to, what do kids do here? Well, I'll tell you what I used to do. In the summers, we'd go to my Uncle Harold's farm, which like I said is not in Marshall, but it's darn close to Marshall. And so you'd go to the farm and we'd have fun out there. Do things like, we used to ride the pigs, believe it or not. That's kind of dangerous. Well, I don't know if it's dangerous, though. My Uncle Harold claims those pigs never bite you, but I know some pigs will. And go down to my granddad's farm down south of here. Grandpa Wine was fine. We used to play at his barn. He used to tell us never to play at his barn because we'd get hurt, but we'd do it anyway. I actually had a great uncle, Herman Einel, who broke his back falling out of a hayloft, I guess, onto a concrete abutment on a beam or something. And was in a wheelchair from then on. Was he always in a wheelchair, or was he in a crutches part? I think he's in a wheelchair the rest of his life. I could be wrong. So we used to do that. So I'd have to say what for kids to do. And then there's always things to do here. You could round up playmates real fast. And down in our neighborhood, we used to go down the alley from us. We had Teddy Snedeker, and across the street from us was Ron Murphy, and there was the Meyer kids up in the corner. They got killed. You remember that? I don't know if you remember that or not.
What was the name?
I think Meyer. Commodore was his first name. Now that was not the kid's name. That was his father's name. Commodore Meyer, I believe. M-Y-E-R. In I'm going to get this all wrong. It must have been about 1948. Commodore Meyer and 3 of his kids, we left 1 kid home, were driving back from Terre Haute, Indiana, and he caught his front wheel of his car in a, he swerved. Let's see how he got into, he got his car, his tire off the pavement. You know, there's a drop down. Yeah. And so he risked it real hard to get back on the road, and risked it so far that he went into the other lane and ran head on into a car.
Well, we moved from here in late 1947, late 47 and early 48. So we were living in Martinsville then.
Now, I was going to say, I knew you moved to Martinsville. Yeah.
After the 4th grade year, my folks moved, and I finished up 4th grade by living at my grandparents'.
Actually, I talked about him a little bit. It's got the exact date and the information about the accident in that black book I have out there about my immediate family. Okay. It's on his shelf. Yeah, but that didn't hit us hard. I don't know why. Maybe kids are not, maybe we're not as emotional as we should have been. Who knows? But I remember those kids, the 3 people I knew died. Can't think of the kids' first names now. There was, actually, I think 1 person survived. I think the oldest girl survived the accident. And then the boy survived. The oldest boy did because he stayed home. He wasn't with them that day. But, getting back to what you said about what what Marshall, how to describe Marshall, I'd have to describe it primarily as being an ideal place for kids. And probably for adults, but I can't talk from from experience. I don't know. I haven't lived here as an adult. I'll tell you this much, it turns out that you feel like it's a real anchor. When I was here, I mean, you have something to anchor to. We anchored to the Grand Church part, but we also anchored just to the people of Marshall in general. I like the fact that people knew you. I like the fact that you can walk down the street and people say, there goes Bobby Tapscott. And his two brothers.
Well, Bob, I want to say again, it's just been a delight to visit with you and kind of reminisce about some old times. We had a lot of common. And so glad that you do come back to Marshall once in a while.
I'll be back.
And keep up that writing, and Roy's be glad to see and read some of those. And with that, we appreciate you and your wife both really representing Marshall as a byproduct of what Marshall has had in the past, and keep us in mind for the future. And what goes in this interview will obviously be a part of future history. Some of your family or other people will say, gee, I remember that guy's name, and well, I didn't know that about him. So we're putting down some history right today.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a delight having you.
Thank you very much.